In the Bavarian countryside of 1975, a young woman named Anneliese Michel began to change. It wasn't the epilepsy diagnosis, nor the spiral of depression, it was something far darker. She told her family she heard voices. Voices that spoke words no doctor could diagnose. They clung to their faith. She begged for exorcisms. We walked the blurred line between mental illness and supernatural despair. We asked whence more what evil her soul may have faced. A girl named Anneliese Michel walked between two worlds, one of faith and one of terror. After years of failed treatments, doctors' shrugs, and a family nearly broken by fear, Father Ernstalt submitted a request to the Bishop of Wurzburg to approve the ancient Roman ritual of exorcism for Anneliese Michel, citing strong evidence of demonic possession and natural strength, knowledge of unknown languages, aversion to sacred objects, and blasphemous behavior far beyond mental illness. The bishop hesitated, but eventually approved the request, ordering that it be done discreetly and alongside medical supervision. Thus began the 67 rites performed over 10 grueling months, behind closed doors, with only her family, 2 priests, and a tape recorder as witnesses to the darkness that took root in the Michel home. The first session was held on September 24, 1975. Anneliese, frail and pale, sat silently on her knees, surrounded by rosaries and holy water, the room dimly lit by a single candle. At first nothing, but then her body contorted, her back arched unnaturally, and a deep voice erupted from her mouth, not one, but many, overlapping like a chorus of the damned. She growled and snarled, spoke Latin and Aramaic, identified herself as several entities: Lucifer, Cain, Judas, Nero, and even Hitler. The priests demanded names. The voices answered. Anneliese's face twisted into grotesque expressions. Her eyes rolled back, and her hands clenched so tightly they bled from her fingernails, digging into her palms. She hissed at holy water as if it burned. She bit her own arm until flesh tore. She tore rosaries apart with her teeth and spat them out like bones. These were not the cries of a sick girl. These were the cries of something ancient and angry. Sessions continued once or twice a week, each lasting hours. She stopped eating, saying the demons wouldn't let her. She dropped to under 40 kilograms. She would kneel and bow hundreds of times in a day until her knees bled. Her voice, once soft and quiet, became a guttural roar that echoed through the house. The tapes recorded at all 67 sessions of torment, prayer, howling, and violent thrashing. In one recording, she speaks calmly as herself, "I am afraid." Then instantly, the voice shifts deeper, growling, almost amused. "She belongs to us." Father Alt and Father Renz kept detailed logs, convinced they were fighting real evil. They believed she was chosen for suffering to atone for the sins of youth and the modern world's loss of faith. Her mother, too, became convinced Anneliese was a vessel for divine struggle, crying often, praying harder, and watching helplessly as her daughter transformed into something she could no longer recognize. The medical community, however, was outraged. Doctors and psychiatrists warned that Anneliese was suffering from psychosis, compounded by epilepsy and severe religious delusion. They pleaded with the family to commit her to psychiatric care, but the Michels refused. So did Anneliese. She believed her suffering was a test. "I must endure," she said, "for souls." She believed she was carrying demons for others, that her pain had purpose. Her body deteriorated. She tore her clothes, broke bones during fits, and sometimes went days without sleeping. She barked like a dog for hours, crawled under tables, ate insects and spiders, and screamed at night in voices that did not belong to her. But in the rare moments between possessions, she would cry weakly, softly, and beg the priests to keep going. "Don't stop. Please, they will kill me if you stop." Her faith was all that remained. At one point, she told Father Renz that the Virgin Mary had appeared to her, offering a way out, but she chose to remain in torment to be a martyr. Whether this was delusion or divine is left to belief, but her conviction was absolute. Her hands became claws, her face sunken, her eyes hollow, yet her voice still cried out for salvation. As the exorcisms continued, so did public suspicion. Neighbors heard her screams. Some called the police. The priests dismissed the warnings, and the family closed their curtains. They truly believed they were witnessing a spiritual war that few would understand. But it was no longer just about good and evil. It was about survival. Every night became darker, every breath harder. By May 1976, Anneliese could barely walk. Her knees were shattered from constant kneeling. Her bones jutted through her skin. Her mouth bled from biting herself. Eyes no longer focused on this world. Still, the priests continued. They truly believed the final expulsion was near, that salvation was close. But with each rite, the voices grew fainter, not from being driven out, but from Anneliese's body, losing the strength to host them. And when she fell silent between sessions, the silence was worse than the screams. It was the silence of death stalking the doorway. Yet even in her last days, she still begged for prayer, still whispered scripture, still believed that her suffering mattered. And though her body was breaking, her spirit remained firm and yielding to science, unbending to doubt. As June arrived, the countdown to her final breath began. Born in 1952 to a deeply devout Roman Catholic family in the small town of Lebelfing, Anneliese's childhood seemed unremarkable at first glance. She was a quiet, intelligent girl, with soft eyes and a voice so gentle, it often got lost in conversation. Her family, especially her mother Anna, held religion close, like armor against the growing secularism of post-war Germany. Daily rosaries, weekly confession, and reverence for saints weren't rituals in the Michel household, they were necessities. But beneath the silence of devotion, something stirred. When Anneliese was just 16, in the prime of her adolescence, she suffered her first seizure, a violent, trembling rupture that left her disoriented and afraid. Doctors diagnosed her with temporal lobe epilepsy, and she began a regimen of medication, hopeful it would end the unexplainable chaos blooming inside her brain. But it didn't. The seizures continued, so did the fear. Then came the whispers, soft at first, indistinct. She would wake in the night, feeling something pressing down on her chest, as if invisible hands were holding her spirit captive while her body trembled. She told her parents she heard voices calling her a damned soul, mocking her prayers, and laughing during Mass. They thought it was the epilepsy playing cruel tricks. Hallucinations mixed with the devout guilt of a religious girl too afraid of hell. The doctors adjusted her medication, added antidepressants, and assured the family it was psychological, maybe even early signs of schizophrenia. But the medications did not silence the voices. They grew louder, bolder, more intelligent. Anneliese said the voices knew her thoughts, mocked her for them. By 18, she began slipping into what her family could only describe as states. Her eyes would glaze over, her posture would shift, and she would speak in guttural growls, spitting blasphemies no one believed she knew. She began destroying crucifixes, tearing pictures of Christ from the walls, and screaming at the Virgin Mary statue in their living room, calling her a whore. These episodes left her exhausted, ashamed, even more devout in the aftermath, praying frantically, fasting, and begging her parents to take her to a priest. They did, but the local clergy refused to perform any exorcism. The church had grown cautious after decades of being criticized for embracing superstition. Instead, the priests recommended she continue medical treatment. But as the months passed, Anneliese's world darkened. She began seeing shadowed faces in every room, some crouched on her furniture, others grinning behind doors. They followed her even in sleep, creeping into her dreams with burning eyes and torn flesh. One morning, she told her mother, "They sit on my chest all night. They won't let me sleep." Her body began deteriorating. She ate less, claiming food tasted like rotting blood. She spoke less often, sitting for hours muttering the Lord's Prayer backwards. Her hands trembled during blessings. She stopped going to school. And then came the moment that changed everything. She woke up in the middle of the night screaming in Latin words she had never learned on. When her father rushed in, she snarled at him in a voice that didn't belong to her. A low, growling, cruel voice that said, "She belongs to us now." That was the moment her mother truly believed. Her daughter wasn't mentally ill, she was possessed, and so began their descent. And in the candlelit rooms of the church, 16 rites began. 70 times a prayer repeated in her name. But it wasn't redemption she sought, it was release. Release from the thing that lived inside her, the thing that screamed in tongues, spat holy water, and twisted her body with a force no human could contain. And when she died, the world asked, was it possession or a medical failure? Tonight we descend into her journal entries, her tortured cries, the real audio tapes from the rites. This is the harrowing true story of Anneliese Michel, the girl who believed she was spoken through, until the world watched her break. In the quiet countryside of Bavaria, where the church bells echo through fog-draped hills and villagers whisper ancient prayers before their morning bread, it was 1975 when the church finally said yes. By the summer of 1976, the Michel household had become a battleground of desperation, faith, and despair. Anneliese could no longer speak for long without collapsing. Her once strong limbs had withered, her eyes hollowed by fasting and screaming, and her voice, when it emerged, was a ghost of its former self. But the echoes of Anneliese Michel's agony did not die with her. They deepened, multiplied, and twisted into something that still pulses beneath the skin of modern belief. In the years following her death, countless theologians, psychologists, skeptics, and spiritualists have dissected her case in dusty lecture halls, late-night YouTube breakdowns, whispered podcasts, and seminary debates, each trying to pin down a truth that continues to squirm just out of reach. Some say it was mass hysteria contained within one fragile soul, a collision between a girl's devout upbringing and her untreated neurological deterioration. Others insist it was the devil himself, incarnate through ancient spirits that found in Anneliese the perfect vessel, faithful enough to endure, broken enough to enter, and courageous enough to suffer for others. But beyond all theories lies the chilling fact that no one, not the doctors, not the priests, not even the tapes, ever fully explained what happened to her. Not why she growled names she'd never heard, not how her slight frame bent iron bedposts, not how, in the dead of night, with no training, she spoke Latin, Hebrew, and Aramaic with the fluency of a scholar. And perhaps the most terrifying part wasn't her behavior, but how deeply she believed it all. See, true horror doesn't always come from fangs or shadows. It comes when conviction replaces reality. When the line between spiritual salvation and psychological torment dissolves into blood-stained sheets and hollow eyes. When a girl begs for help and the world, blinded by categories, fails to listen. The question no one wants to ask is not whether Anneliese Michel was possessed by demons, but whether we as a society were possessed by the idea that she was lying. Whether our need to explain, diagnose, and rationalize suffocated a soul that simply wanted to be heard. Her suffering wasn't just a medical mystery or spiritual test, it was a mirror held up to faith, to science, and to human fear. For what frightens us more, that demons exist, or that our minds can manufacture them so convincingly we burn alive within them? That belief alone, interrupted, unchecked, can kill. And if that's true, then what separates a martyr from a victim? When Anneliese looked at her parents with tear-streaked eyes and said, "I want to suffer for others," was that delusion or sainthood? She never once blamed the church, never cursed her parents, never doubted that the pain served a higher purpose. She died believing that her body was a battlefield between good and evil, and that her pain, her silence, her emaciated screams were necessary to keep others safe. Who among us has ever believed in something so completely? And should we envy her faith, or fear it in the decades since? Her case has inspired thousands of reported possessions, most debunked, some still unexplained. It led the Catholic Church to revise its exorcism protocol, becoming more restrictive, more clinical. The tapes, grainy, crackling, impossible to forget, are still played in dark corners of the internet. And to this day, people claim that strange things happen when they listen to them. Phones freeze, lights flicker. One priest who listened to all 42 hours reportedly suffered a nervous breakdown. Urban legend or something deeper. Her name appears in spiritual forums, not as a case, but as a warning. Because Anneliese's story forces us to confront an impossible truth, that some battles are not waged in the flesh, but in the soul. And when we fail to understand the war, the casualty is always the innocent. Her grave in Klingenberg remains simple. A white cross, some candles, always lit. Often notes are left behind, written in trembling handwriting. "I know how you felt. I see them too." Or, "Help me, Anneliese." For some, she's a saint. For others, a symbol of the dangers of unchecked religious fervor. But for everyone, she is unforgettable. Her story bleeds into ours, because if it happened to her, it could happen again. And not just to the devout or the mentally ill, but to anyone whose cries dainty fit neatly into a box. Anyone who suffers in ways the world doesn't understand. That's what haunts us. Not the demons, but the silence. The chilling, echoing silence of a girl pleading through her bruised lips. Please, don't stop the prayers. Even in the moments before her death, when her bones cracked under the strain of kneeling, she whispered her last words, not in fear, but in surrender. Mother, stay with me, I'm afraid. And isn't that the most human sentence ever spoken? Beneath the growls, the shrieks, the theological storms, and courtroom crossfires there was a young woman, terrified, in pain, begging for love in her final breath. If there's a lesson to be found in this tragedy, it's not in demonology or psychiatry, but in empathy. In choosing to listen before we label, to reach before we retreat, and to never, ever let conviction blind compassion, because the greatest exorcism is not casting out evil, but refusing to let it disguise itself as righteousness. Anneliese Michel did not ask to become a martyr. She asked to be free. Free from the voices, the torment, the burden of carrying an invisible war that no one around her truly understood. And in the end, perhaps the horror isn't that she was possessed. It's that she was alone. So tonight, as her tapes echo once again through speakers around the world, remember this. Sometimes the devil doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers she's lying. Man, that whisper is all it takes to damn a soul that only wanted to be saved. Her final exorcisms took place in June, with her body curled into the fetal position. Trembling on the floor as Father Renz read Latin prayers over her limp frame. On June 30th, 1976, Anneliese Michel died quietly in her room at just 23 years old. The official cause of death was malnutrition and dehydration, her body ravaged by months of starvation, exhaustion, and violent physical strain. She weighed only 30 kilograms, less than 70 pounds, and bore the marks of hundreds of self-inflicted wounds, ruptured ligaments from kneeling, and untreated broken bones. Her mother, Anna, kneeling beside her corpse, said her daughter's face appeared peaceful in death, almost holy, as if her suffering had been accepted by heaven. But the world saw it differently. What followed was not spiritual closure, but a national scandal. Within months, the state launched a full investigation, leading to the arrest and prosecution of Anneliese's parents and the 2 priests who conducted the exorcisms. The charge: negligent homicide. The trial began in 1978 in the District Court of Aschaffenburg in captivated Germany, dividing the public between those who believed in the power of evil and those who believed in the tragedy of untreated mental illness. The courtrooms filled with press, theologians, medical experts, and witnesses from all sides. Prosecutors argued that Anneliese was a severely mentally ill woman suffering from a combination of epilepsy, psychosis, and religious delusion, that her parents and priests, blinded by faith, had let her die in agony without medical help. They presented neurological assessments, medical records, and psychiatric opinions, claiming that with proper psychiatric intervention and hospitalization, she would have survived. The defense, on the other hand, called priests, family members, and even theologians, who testified to the presence of genuine possession. Citing her knowledge of languages, she never studied her hatred of sacred objects, and the multiple distinct voices heard during the sessions. Audio tapes from the exorcisms were played in court. In them, the voice of Anneliese, sometimes layered with others, can be heard cursing, mocking Christ, snarling and pleading. One of the most chilling moments featured her saying in a rasped, otherworldly tone, "I am Lucifer. I dwell within her." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The prosecution maintained it was all symptomatic psychosis. The defense called it spiritual evidence. The most haunting part of the trial was the moral conflict it exposed, not just about demons or science, but about belief itself. Can you be guilty if you genuinely think you're saving someone's soul? Can faith be criminal if it leads to death? After weeks of debate, the court ruled that the parents and priests were guilty of negligent homicide, but their sentences were light: 3 years probation and suspended jail time. The judge acknowledged that all 4 had acted under sincere conviction and that they truly believed Anneliese was possessed. But belief, he said, did not absolve responsibility. The ruling echoed across the world. To some, it was justice. To others, sacrilege. To the church, it was a cautionary tale. And to those who had listened to the audio tapes, it was something far worse, a warning. After the trial, Anneliese's grave became a pilgrimage site. Thousands visited the small cemetery in Klingenberg, praying at her headstone, leaving rosaries and candles, calling her a martyr. Her parents remained steadfast in their belief. Their daughter was not mentally ill. She was chosen by God to suffer for the sins of others. They never moved, never stopped praying. In later interviews, Anneliese Michel said she knew what she was doing. She told us the pain was her mission, that she offered her soul. In the years that followed, Anneliese Michel's story spread far beyond Germany. It inspired books, articles, investigations, and in 2005, the Hollywood film The Exorcism of Emily Rose, which reimagined her life in a courtroom horror format, introducing her case to an entirely new generation. But despite dramatization, the core remained intact, a young woman whose cries were never fully understood. In 1999, at the request of devotees who believed her body was incorrupt, her grave was exhumed. The body was found decomposed as expected, but that did not silence the believers. They said her soul had already ascended. Today, the Catholic Church rarely speaks of Anneliese Michel. Her story is used cautiously in theological circles, often as a warning not about demons, but about letting belief override medical care. And yet, beneath that caution lies something undeniable. No one can explain everything. Not the voices, not the languages, not the violence, not the timing. Some doctors have admitted that her case challenges the borders between science and faith, and some priests still believe she was a battlefield where heaven and hell collided. Whatever the truth, one thing remains. Anneliese Michel's story is not just about possession. It's about what happens when belief is all that is left, and no one knows how to save you. In her final diary entry, just days before her death, she wrote, "I am nothing. Everything is you, Lord." And with those words, she vanished into history, leaving behind questions we still cannot answer. And so, as the final stone settled above her grave, the world moved on, or pretended to.